All right, after Father Reesman's talk, we will have a Q&A session. And to facilitate this, we ask that you write down your questions on the index cards on your table. We will have two of our officers, both Dr. Frank Smith and Dr. Krishna Dasgupta, who will pick up those index cards during the talk. And then we'll present your questions to Father Reesman at the end and allow him to respond to your questions. Please know that our event today will be recorded. Therefore, please silence all cell phones. And if you could please minimize audience noise, that would be greatly appreciated. Now I will introduce our speaker, Father Nathan Reesman. So Father Nathan Reesman was born and raised in Burlington, Wisconsin, where he attended St. Mary's Grade School and also Burlington Public High School, graduating in 1997. He studied at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, graduating in December of 2000 with a bachelor's degree in political science. He received his seminary formation at St. Francis de Sales Seminary in Milwaukee, graduating with a Master's of Divinity degree in 2006. After his ordination as a priest for the Archdiocese of Milwaukee in 2006, he was assigned to St. Mary's Visitation Parish in Elm Grove as associate pastor. In 2009, he was assigned to Holy Angels Parish and St. Francis Cabrini Parish in West Bend as a shared associate pastor. In 2011, he was assigned as the pastor of St. Francis Cabrini, West Bend, and in 2014 as the pastor of St. Mary's Immaculate Conception in West Bend. In May of 2019, he completed studies at the University of St. Mary of the Lake in Mundelein, Illinois, obtaining a Doctor of Ministry degree. In 2013, Father Reesman first began his work with Courage International, ministering to men and women who experience same-sex attraction, and also ministering to parents and loved ones of those who experience same-sex attraction. Father is currently the lead Courage and Encourage chaplain for the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, and he also serves on the executive board of Courage International. Father Reesman will continue his ministry with Courage International as he assumes his new assignment this coming January 1st as the vicar for clergy at the Archdiocese of Milwaukee. So please let us welcome Father Reesman.
For the introduction and for the welcome and for the chance to be here today, the chance to offer Mass and to visit with a group of wonderful people. And y'all look very friendly anyway, so I really appreciate that. So that's nice. So here's what we're going to do. We'll just have a little short prayer, and then I'll walk my way through some points for a while. It won't take too long. And then, as mentioned at the end, some chances for question and answer. Would you join me, please? In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. So again, it is great to have this privilege to address the Milwaukee Guild and friends and affiliates and many others. So it's a blessing. I appreciate the invitation and the chance to be here. So my topic and my title is A Place of Communion, Authentic Pastoral Support for Those Impacted by Same-Sex Attraction. So I'll do some introductory points to set up the talk, and then we'll go. It's in 3 parts after that, not too complicated. So an opening observation, I always say this in all my talks because I guess it's true. This is a large topic. This is a very, very complicated and frankly nuanced topic, and of same-sex attraction, that is, and how to properly help those impacted by it. So why do I say that? First of all, the topic of, and I'll call it SSA, abbreviated going forward, it's just quicker to say than same-sex attraction. SSA touches many people personally. So both in terms of those who experience it internally and those who are friends and loved ones of those who experience it. So it touches a wide range of people, so that makes it a large topic. It's also a sensitive subject, which makes some sense, and that's always the case when one offers, I would say, normative or ethical commentary on matters of sexuality, deeply personal thing in our lives, so sensitive. It's also a political topic, frankly. It's an agenda, ideological, governmental kind of topic because now in recent decades it's been framed as a question of rights by a segment of society that believes that a gay lifestyle is merely another way for humans to engage in relationships, among other ways. We'll get to that later. But if one thinks of it that way, it becomes a political matter. So that, too, is a really big piece of the discussion. And not only that, if all that wasn't enough to make it kind of big, even within the contemporary Christian community, let's call it the church and beyond, there is not, let's say, public unanimous agreement about how to handle this topic of SSA in the light of the gospel. So we have an established body of Catholic teachings, which we're going to get to. But while that may be true, there's lots of chatter, I will say, from various voices in the church, even for those somewhat higher up, if I could put it that way, about other ways to think about this topic. So that makes this also a little bit on the messy side for a Saturday morning, right? So, in short, for a talk like this, it's a large topic. And I'll add to that, too, one extra kind of explanatory piece, because now, as I talk on this subject recently, I've now had to add this disclaimer at the opening. What I'm going to talk about this morning is not specifically about the gender ideology question. I'm not really going to get into that. I can in the Q&A if you want a little bit, but I know you got a speaker coming up next year who's going to touch on that in a more direct manner, which is a great opportunity. Please make sure you go to that upcoming talk. So it's not talk about transgender ideology because, to be honest, the two issues of SSA and gender kinds of questioning about one's identity, while they're often lumped together in cultural discourse, the reality is that they're very different kinds of issues. They're treated differently from a pastoral care approach. Their only, I think, deep similarities come into play in the level of those who are family members of those dealing with it. There are some parallels there. But otherwise, if one's going to talk about SSA, it's a different kind of situation usually than the gender one. So this is not on that necessarily. That being said, as I go along, some things will apply. And you can ask about them because I've also worked with that community also. So I have experience in both of those areas. So that's kind of some opening pieces. So since this is a large topic, angle of this talk goes kind of like this. It's on the pastoral care angle of things. That's how I'm going to try and encapsulate this. How do you support people who are impacted by this? And what does that mean? Pastoral care generically means something like this. We'll call this an opening operating definition of what pastoral care is, as I would construct it anyway. One, it's an attempt to offer support and comfort to persons who experience some kind of personal loss or pain because of life circumstances. So it's giving comfort to those in pain, A, one. Two, it utilizes pastoral care, the truth and wisdom of the Christian revelation. So we're giving care grounded in Christian truth. And three, all that to allow for Christ himself to be encountered as the divine physician for the authentic healing of any of our wounds. That's how I would give you a pastoral care definition, right? So there is a pain that's addressed to Christian wisdom to give comfort, all to open up the pathway to the ultimate healer who is Jesus Christ. That's how it really ought to be thought of. So with that in mind, what's my angle on SSA this morning? It is that, the pastoral care aspect of it. Even that's big, but it's a smaller subset, okay? Talks in three parts. Part one is going to be talking about the reality that men and women do experience same-sex attraction. It's not a made-up thing. And I'll talk a bit about that and a little bit about how those who do experience it would describe their emotional situation. Second part is going to outline briefly what I would call two contrasting approaches for how to deal with that reality. If SSA is a thing, and it is, how does one meet it in the person, in the world, in the culture? And there is something like a secular answer that I will offer, and then I would call it a contrasting church answer, okay? And I'll offer both of those outlines. The secular answer is essentially to support an actively gay lifestyle. The church's answer is to talk about what I call integration and conversion of heart in the cross and resurrection of Christ. And that integration is what the Gospels talk about as changing one's heart, conversion. So that's our answer. In part three, the final part of this is going to talk about courage and encourage as ministries, as apostles, as a church outreach to help people impacted by SSA. How does one, process this in one's life? And that's what these things are for. The goal of these apostolates, courage and encourage, which we'll say more about toward the end, the goal is true communion. So my talk title, A Place of Communion, is really, we're going to get down to the fact that what that place is a zone of harmony with God, self, and neighbor in light of the truth of Jesus Christ. in a group setting called the church, which supports one on a walk of faith. So it's communion. And what are they inviting people to? Good relationships with self and with the Lord. And this is the church's purpose and goal. Okay, our goal is to be the expression and generator of communion in this world and the next. That's our whole point of existence, right? So for those impacted with SSA, the healing offered in Christ, and this is a key point, is not about trying to get rid of some attraction or trying to, I will use in quotes, pray the gay away, as is sometimes put out there in popular parlance. So as an opener, I'll tell you that's not what courage is about. And we're often accused of that, but it's not true. Typically, it's the opposite. It's a healing of the ache of the human heart that's accomplished by accepting our situation in life in light of the cross and the resurrection and friendship with the Lord. So that's kind of my roadmap. So an interior reality of SSA, responses to it, and the third part, courage and encourage. That's how we're going to walk through this in the next half hour or so, give or take. So the first part, some comments about the situation of those men and women who experience same-sex attraction. How many people experience same-sex attraction? The fact is we don't actually have good numbers on it, but I would think that probably if one's going to ask for objective kinds of data, it's not a large group of the population who experience it in a very intense way. So I would say small group of the population is going to experience SSA in a way that is permanent and deeply rooted, that has a pretty regular daily impact on one's existence. It's not a large group of people, but they are certainly part of our population. I would say more people probably experience in what I would call a passing way, that sometimes is temporary and not very intense, and can come and go at different points in life. So in the culture, we have this idea that like gay is like a fixed thing and a category, and I like wake up one morning maybe and I realize I'm this and I'm locked into this forever. That's not really true. In my experience of dealing with people who work with this in their lives, SSA is often a very fluid reality. It's on a spectrum. It's on a continuum. Every person's unique. And there are many people who do kind of have it for a while, and then one day it's just sort of gone. Other people, they can have it in a way that is not so deeply ingrained that one can perhaps marry the opposite sex and struggle a bit, but make a go of that. But for some people, though, it is so deeply a part of their person that it's a real, it's a challenge, right? So there's this whole range of ways to experience it. Also, to say this at the outset, we don't know where it comes from. There is no great answer to where it originates in the person. And I'll get to this later. You know, if you're a mom or a dad or a loved one and you realize that a child is dealing with this, your first reaction is always, what did I do wrong? And the answer is probably nothing, to be honest. Its origins are mysterious. That's how we would, I think, talk about it in the church. What's it like emotionally? You know, like I said, no two experiences are identical, but from, I would call some general observations that I have gained after almost a decade now of working with people who deal with this. So I'll offer a generic picture, and again, I stress generic. There's always exceptions to this, right? But generically speaking, one has a sensation of being drawn in a sexual way to members of the same sex, and often it's first encountered in adolescence. So that's where this arises in one's self, you know, one's aware of it. And the experience is often, I think they would describe it as socially isolating and very awkward, kind of scary. There is the sensation that one does not fit into the quote-unquote normal things of an adolescent existence. So all that arises in one's heart when one starts to come across this in the self. Typically, you're going to find in people who deal with SSA a sense of shame or struggle. They don't want to express it to close friends and family. It's an embarrassing kind of topic for them, at first anyway. Maybe there's an initial feeling of interior rejection and disdain for the attraction itself. There's almost a loathing for the thing. I sense this in me, and I grow in a kind of disgust for it because I realize it's kind of a burden and a trial, and I want it to go away. That sometimes is common too, especially early on, but it can last a long time. Sometimes there's a deep sense in the person who experiences it, a realization that maybe I am this anomaly in the regular world. I'm deeply different, or possibly that maybe there's something wrong with me. This crosses one's mind as one unfolds this reality. And one asks questions. What's my life going to look like as I get older? You know, am I going to follow the married pathway? What are my options? Will I be happy? Am I going to be lonely? That comes up, obviously. Oftentimes, sadly enough, but understandably, there's a rejection of faith and a pushing away of God in this population because for many of them, not all, but for many, one arrives at the conclusion that God has given me this thing and it's unfair, and I can't believe in a God who's done this thing to me, so I reject the whole thing outright. Again, not universally true, but that's a rather common reaction I have found. If one hangs in there in the faith, then there's a question of where do I belong in the church? Maybe I've struggled through the God question, but what's my life as a Catholic? Do I fit in? Does God have a plan for me? What's his plan for my life? And then lastly, I'd say often those who experience SSA experience a heightened emotional sensitivity, I think typically, and they're very aware of emotional wounds in life that lead them searching for meaning in their relationships, I think in a very acute kind of way compared to the rest of the general population because of what they are carrying inside of them. So that would be a little snapshot of the person, man or woman who experiences SSA. What about their family members? What about their loved ones? So that could be a spouse, could be a mom and dad, maybe a sibling, typically parents. They ask the question, where did we go wrong? Did I make a mistake? Am I a bad parent? There is a mourning of the loss of what's typical, and this future one thought one was going to have for one's family seems to evaporate when one learns that a child is gay. So you go through that. A real fear of being distanced from a loved one and the ending of a relationship. Like, is this the end of my bond as a family? A feeling they can't win. They're stuck in this hard spot. Often parents that I work with, so we'll call these in the more faithful Catholic group, are torn about how to support their loved one while knowing they can't endorse a lifestyle that's actively gay. So there's this tension. How do I help this person, but I can't give them what they want necessarily, which is to say everything is okay. There's isolation, there's loneliness because you think if you're a parent, I must be the only one. I think I'm on an island, so it's a very nerve-wracking place to be, and it's an anxious place to be if you're a loved one. And frankly, there is confusion, I experience anyway, about how to respond as a mom or dad loved one due to the mixed signals in the church and in the culture. It's like, and where do I stand? What's the good Catholic response to this? I hear one message on, I will say, Twitter. I have something else in the catechism. Maybe my pastor said X, or some priest said Y, or some bishop said this. So this throws people for a real loop, and this comes home to your family, it's destabilizing to not have a consistent message on this topic as a Catholic these days. So my point, in part one ends here. A generalized observation or conclusion about SSA, either those who have it themselves or those who love them, is that everyone who is dealing with it is looking for a way to ease some emotional pain that comes with the situation. That's a generic across-the-board thing, right? It brings some kind of emotional pain to varying degrees, and everybody who's impacted by it wants to dull the pain, which makes sense. That's a natural reaction, and I think, understand that. It comes from a desire to alleviate this tension within the self. And anyone in any type of emotional, physical, mental pain, what do they seek to do? They want a way out, or they want to make it bearable. So I think we all get that, okay? So, is there SSA? Yes. Is it, as the culture describes it, it's more complicated. It impacts persons and families. And where does it leave you? Reeling a little bit inside with this reality. So, part one. Part two, how to deal with personal challenges associated with the situation. So for the sake of brevity, because again I said, big topic, right? I'm going to categorize the responses to the presence of SSA into, I would say, two essentially major and contrasting approaches. The first would be the secular response of what I would call the normalization response, and acting upon desires as an acceptable pathway through this challenge, on one hand, as opposed to the church is established, I'd say, orthodox response of, I would call it, integration and the conversion of hearts. I would call those two differing ways to respond to the reality, part one. This is a thing, how do you handle it? Secular, Christian. So first, again, speaking in broad strokes, but it helps for a talk like this to do so. The secular contemporary culture response to SSA. So this is what I said, it's normalization, right? This is the normalization of same-sex behaviors and lifestyles as a way to offer a comfort or solution out of the challenges that SSA brings to people. And this is a key point. To do that, this requires the construction and maintenance of its own ethical framework. Okay, you need to construct an ethics around the solution. If we're going to say that normalization is the way out of the pain, it requires an ethics to support that. And it looks kind of like this. It requires the belief by individuals and by a large majority of society that there is nothing inherently unnatural or wrong about same-sex attraction or relationships or same-sex genital behavior. Okay, so that's one ethical norm of the normalization model. I'll say it again, to say there's nothing wrong with this. Similarly, there's nothing unusual or potentially harmful about what's frequently the reality of emotionally, I would say, codependent relationships that come with same-sex partnerships. What do I mean by that? Is I have encountered people who have tried to live in a sort of same-sex relationship. They experience, I think, in a very acute way, an emotional roller coaster of the situation. And if we're going to normalize that, we're going to say there's nothing unusual about that. And I would suggest that that's a little bit of an ethical construction. How about that as a way to put that? And lastly, okay, all this requires a legal prohibition of any discriminatory treatment of gay behaviors and lifestyles with the aim of eliminating the framework of a heterosexual social norm. You follow that, right? So if we're going to have this, a society must make it illegal to normalize heterosexual lifestyles. All this is required to support this approach. And there's some more to this, because in the mix of this is a strain of thought that argues that there ought to be within the same-sex world an argument for monogamy of their relationships. And this is like a subset of the ethical argument. So some advocate for an SSA model that attempts to, I would say, mirror biblical heterosexual marriage as an avenue to acceptability, even including raising adopted or artificially produced children as part of the scenario of trying to make an alternative pathway, right? If you're going to go that route, one has to make normative claims about the need for monogamous same-sex partnerships as opposed to open sexual relationships and activity. I explain this because for a decent portion of our recent past in America, let's call it the 80s and 90s, if you ask the gay community, they didn't want to get married. It wasn't for them. They wanted open relationships. They wanted this, they wanted that. And it's been a newer thing to kind of overlay on top of that segment of the population this idea that they could parallel accepted heterosexual marriage. So we have an ethical subset here, right? So if one's going to make the normative claim that there ought to be monogamous same-sex partnerships, and then that's the way to do this, and there are some in the church who are trying to argue this at this point too, the extra catch is one has to do so in a way that is not going to be perceived as not judgmental about those persons, because chiefly important today is not making anybody upset, all right? So what am I trying to say? It's a tedious ethical framework that we're trying to construct and maintain in this model, right? What is the hope for outcome of this approach of normalization and acceptance? It goes kind of like this. If a family or society can be welcoming enough of these things and treat them as an equally valid way to live and have sexuality and a lifestyle, then it's going to end the experience of isolation. Okay, it's going to dull the emotional pain. We'll call this pastoral care from the perspective of if I normalize it enough, the pain will go away for these people impacted by it. It's a live and let live mentality. Right? So that's the aim. If we're going to normalize it and put laws around it and try and change a cultural mindset, if we just do that enough, it is going to eliminate the interior tension of those who have SSA or those who love them, and then we will live, if you will, happily ever after in our world. That's kind of the way to go forward. So I'll repeat, there's a linchpin assumption that goes with this. It's an approach to SSA that has to reject the claim that there's anything objectively harmful about same-sex activities. You have to reject that claim to go down this route, and they rely upon this for a few assumptions. One goes like this: the internal emotional pain and challenges of those with SSA are soon to be the result of social biases and social constructs that favor the heterosexual model, rather than because of the nature of SSA itself. and also of the genital or non-genital relationships in and of themselves. If one removes the social bias, anyone who experiences SSA or their loved ones will not have to carry an interior burden, and any ongoing experience or challenge of discomfort with SSA is only the result, in this model, of some form of victimization by another party that needs to be eradicated from society through any available means. Just follow the chain of argument, right? So if we're going to go the normalization route, you have to set to the side any idea that SSA relationships are inherently wrong, and you also have to claim that any ongoing pain is not because of something inside, it's from something outside that they experience, and we need to eradicate the outside threat to fix the interior pain. So all of this gives rise to our current political problems about the topic, right? This is where it comes into the public realm. What's the veracity of this approach? To be honest, an appeal to social science data is the only way that we're going to be able to test this out, because it's not based in any kind of objective truth. It's based in experience. And if that's going to happen in perceptions and subjective kinds of things, we are years away from unbiased social science evaluations of this model. Years and years away. Which means that we are a long time from being able to evaluate this approach on its own terms. Okay, so as of this morning, given the tools of the secular model that we're operating in our world, one cannot really reject or accept this first model because it takes a lot of data that we just don't have, I think, yet, because it's all based on social currents. So that's one way to handle SSA. Contrast it with what I would call the established Catholic response to it. And this is what I again call pastoral care, right? And to repeat our pastoral care assumptions, we're going to offer support and comfort in terms of pain or loss. We're going to utilize Christian wisdom and allow Christ, the physician, to be the one doing all of the healing. So in the other approach, the non-secular one, giving comfort, quote unquote, requires a few things. First, the church acknowledges that there is pain and challenge for men and women and loved ones who are impacted by SSA. Any pastoral care has to start by acknowledging that there is a pain in front of us that we are trying to work our way through. And we want to give those people who experience this the opportunity to articulate these challenges in settings that are appropriate and confidential. They're going to be, I will use the word safe spaces, okay? So pastoral care means people are hurting, and we want to give them the room to talk about it in ways that are appropriate and confidential. And those have to be places of empathic listening to one's situation. It is required. And we acknowledge that challenges of those with SSA originate from lots of places, one of which is their experience of being misunderstood both in and out of the church. So we must not make fun of people who struggle, and we seek ongoing purification of attitudes that demean or diminish personal challenges. As if to say, okay, part of pastoral care means acknowledging that along the way, we have not been nice to people in a situation. We have picked at, we've made fun of, we have marginalized, and that is not appropriate for a Christian. And part of the church's walk in this case is pointedly acknowledging that fact, that we have made mistakes, not so much in our teachings, but certainly in our attitudes. And one must be able to walk one's way through that. So I would say that all of this is the aspect of pastoral care the church shares most in common with the secular approach. But so far, we're not too far off the page in our approaches up to this point. However, on the part of pastoral care that is called utilizing the truth of Christian revelation, here we take a different approach, and they diverge probably dramatically. Any authentic pastoral care for those impacted by SSA is going to rest upon the objective teachings about human nature that are offered to us in revelation, in divine revelation. That's the scriptures, church teaching, and also natural law. All these things together give us a picture of the nature of SSA itself and also a life that seeks to act out upon them. And that's going to give us the guidelines, if you will, of how to help people in this situation most effectively. So those sources of Christian wisdom in our pastoral care approach tell us these things about persons who experience SSA. They are children of God, for sure, who carry a particular cross, of a condition that is an anomaly in human nature. That's the best way to describe it. and it's not possible to be normalized or mended by acting out on their desires. So I'll say that again. Our Christian wisdom teaches us that pastoral care means that the people with SSA are children of God who carry a particular cross of a situation or condition that is an anomaly in the human family, and it's not possible to be normalized or mended by acting out on those desires because of the nature of that of the acts themselves. Okay, this is the difference from the secular social science approach. We say that the acts themselves contain their own particularly intrinsically challenging nature, and you must wrestle with that if one's going to work one's way through the situation. So to further clarify, right, the attraction to the same sex, this is how I've taken to describing it, and it's an anomaly in that it's out of the typical order of nature. Okay, in the Catechism and certain church documents, we'll use the term disordered. We don't say that as much these days because it lands so heavy on the ears. The fact of disorder is a precise theological term. It's not a clinical term. It's not a psychological term. It simply means it's not in the usual order of the nature of God's created world. So I say an anomaly, right? It's an anomaly in human nature. The attraction in and of itself, even though it's ordered atypically, which makes it challenging, is not sinful. That we have said as a church for a long, long time, right? So the attraction, even though it poses a challenge because it's out of the usual order of nature, the anomaly, is challenging but not sinful. But acting out on that attraction in any kind of sexual, genital ways especially is always sinful because the attraction is by nature not ordered according to the typical pattern of sexual love. It is out of the usual ordering of the spousal nature of the universe, of salvation, and of the human family. So, just as a sidebar, it's for a whole other series of talks to explain why that is. Okay, there are books that are written on this topic. For this morning, because I don't have time to get into it, you're just going to have to accept that that is the Orthodox Catholic position that I just got done telling you. Okay, so if one can just sort of give me that for the morning, we'll go on to the rest of it. Okay, but all that I said requires its own defense, and our current cultural mode this morning is not going to be the defense of that position. One just has to accept that as a Catholic if one's going to do this properly. Therefore, authentic pastoral care is guided by revelation of God's ordered plan for the world, which includes the teaching that a world is both fallen as well as redeemed. It's a fallen world, redeemed world. And in this fallen world, after Eden's tragedy, the Garden of Eden, there exists a wide array of anomalies and painful challenges to God's plan for our flourishing. SSA is one of many. Okay, I will say being born blind is another one. I could list a long, you all are physicians, you deal with anomalies, okay, because it's whatever is what's called unhealthy, right? In a fallen world, there's unhealth all around us, anomalies all around us, right? This is one of many. Authentic pastoral care begins by ruling out the secular approach that I described earlier as a pathway for helping with this, because it sets a boundary about what is off limits and what's best for us. If we know at the outset of the conversation that certain behaviors in and of themselves will always be harmful, then authentic pastoral care sets those off the reservation. They're not going to be pursued or suggested or utilized because I know that they're inherently harmful to the person in question. So pastoral care is guided by the revealed truth of the person. And there's no exceptions to that ever. Any exception would be bad medicine. That's the best way that I can put that, right? Authentic pastoral care is going to begin with the conviction, based on revelation, that it's unhealthy and unethical to engage in same-sex relationships and lifestyles. And doing so would constitute sinful behavior in need of mercy and of healing for those engaging in them. And pastoral care operates on the objective truth that because SSA is an anomaly in nature, then regardless of cultural attitudes, it is going to carry with it unique challenges that inherit to it and are likely enduring for the person who experiences it. So to say that again, it's not that the culture needs to change on it. Okay, what must happen is that the person who experiences it has to come to terms with it, and with it's going to be healthy and of the gospel. So all of the cultural mending in the world will not fix it because of its very nature. It's out of the order of nature. And when one knows that, one doesn't chase solutions that are not exactly solutions to the problem. This is what's called the negative check or via negativa approach to SSA. One rejects certain choices and lifestyles that are potentially such where they're just not possible. The via positiva, the positive way, is the wider, broader road of what one with SSA embraces and says is possible in the grace of Christ. So there's an attitude question here, right? I mean, so the media often talks about, there's this negative, you can't do this, you can't do that approach to Catholic teaching, but that's only part of it. The other part, the deeper part, I'd say that almost the more important part is what can you do? What can you embrace? What are we embracing in this situation? And that, too, is important for pastoral care. And this is the approach to, really, frankly, any sinful behavior across the gospel. Jesus tells us to reject or turn away from certain things, and we're going to embrace something else. So what I'm talking about for SSA here is common across any gospel virtue or vice conversation. It's the same conversation. Okay? If I'm going to turn away from X, Y, Z and be faithful to the gospel, I'm going to embrace ABC, which is the Christian way. They're not unique to SSA. Last part of pastoral care, right? So we're going to offer comfort in the truth of revelation to lead us to Christ. He's the healer and the physician. Now here we speak of, I would say, integration and the conversion of hearts that is at the core of the gospel message. And it requires the conviction, which is tested throughout one's life until one is dead, that the crosses one experiences interiorly and exteriorly are to be accepted as a pathway to the Lord. Whatever we experience in life that is hard, with a choice of how to look at it, and the Gospels tell us it's a pathway to the Lord. This is a theology of redemptive suffering and a spiritual surrender, and the idea that we all have burdens to carry, and that one is only made more miserable if one kicks and fights against them. This is just ancient Christian wisdom. And this is a paradox, and a person often comes to this understanding very slowly in life. That's why in the gospel, Jesus repeats this so many times, take up your cross, take up your cross. And Luke, he says it, take it up daily, because he knows it's a very hard lesson for us to learn, for all of us, no exceptions. Everyone struggles with disordered inclinations and desires. Everybody does. And on the surface, the temptation for all of us is to think that if we just merely give in to those things, it's going to relieve the burden, we're going to feel better. But gospel ethics tells us that that's a false solution. It only makes it worse. That's true about gambling, pornography, overeating. You name the malady, SSA. If I just engage in these SSA partnerships, I'm going to feel better. The gospel always says, no, that's not the pathway to real healing. There must be a negativa and a positive embrace of something else, right? So, how do you encounter Christ? By turning away from some things and frankly embracing Him and directing our passions to Him. As we do, we find freedom and friendship in the Lord. We find communion with Him and with each other. We integrate our appetites and passions that do not control us. We control them. And as we do so, our hearts and selves are opened up to truly expansive love of neighbor, of God, and of self. If I want to really love self, God, and neighbor, I must gain mastery over my inclinations, or they will master me. And that is not the pathway to freedom or joy. So with this view, we see our sufferings not as burdens, but instead as a wealth of riches and graces for our spiritual growth. That's how the saints speak of our sufferings. Teresa would say they're a diamond mine of riches. You have to pull the wealth in with a rake, she would say in her writings, right? That's how rich our sufferings are. For those impacted by SSA, this integration and conversion of the heart, means, and this is a very careful point that I must underscore, the Church does not promote the idea that one must deal with SSA by wishing it away. One must accept it on its own terms and see for what it really is, and also for what it is, what's not going to help it. That's true of anything else too, right? So that means affirming that good friendships and relationships and a role in the Church are possible for these people in this situation. But also that the hard work it takes to maintain these things is always going to be with them. Quite likely, for all of one's life, if one has SSA, this is going to be a thing to work through. It will always be there. So this idea that was popular in different circles of conversion therapy and praying to change orientation, that is not the model of the Church. We simply say, you probably have it for your life. One must learn to deal with it in a way that is healthy and of the gospel. Because certain actions are off the table. just like anything else in the gospel. Okay? For those, the loved ones, with those of us, as a parents, family, the cross comes to the family. A cross comes to the family and also bears fruit in the family. And it's a challenge at first, it's an earthquake at first, but as one works one's way through it as parents and siblings and spouses, one begins to mine the riches of grace in that situation too, and realizes how, for the family, it's a means of conversion of hearts, about attitudes, about all kinds of things. And one loves unconditionally, and because one does, one cannot accept certain behaviors. So if you're a mom or a dad, because I love you, some things I will not agree to, which is a hard conversation to have, but a necessary one. Which leads last part 3, and I will not take a whole lot longer, I promise. Courage and encourage. Okay? So we laid out that SSA exists. It causes its own interior challenges. There's a cultural secular approach that wants to normalize it and say it's fine to be in these active lifestyles. Church, contrastingly, says no. Certain behaviors are inherently problematic, therefore we avoid them to become authentically whole. Now the next question is, how do you do that? Because it does take a lot of support. It's not a piece of cake. Ask anybody who's ever tried to get out of an addiction, for example, alcoholics, gamblers. It's a lot of work to undo that, I will say, twisted up part of our natures that we get into when we reinforce sinful behaviors. They twist us in the wrong way, and it's to be untwisted to find freedom and happiness and joy. The Catholic Church has officially recognized means of pastoral support for all the above-mentioned integration is courage and encourage. And it's a means of ongoing processing of one's struggles with SSA in light of the universal gospel message. And it means recognizing that it's difficult and it takes often lifetime work. And the goal of these apostles is true communion. So life-giving and healthy relationships with each other made possible by life-giving communion and friendship with Christ. Okay, those two things are integrally related. If I'm going to pursue a friendship with Christ, it requires life-giving friendships with other people that are ethically sound and vice versa. The apostolates, what are they? How do they work? So Courage was founded in 1980 in New York City by a group of men who experienced SSA and a handful of priests who were working with them to support their efforts to live a healthy lifestyle. These guys were surrounded by a very actively gay culture in the heart of New York City and said, I don't want to go that way. What can I do to live as a gay man in the Catholic Church who wants to be faithful to the gospel? So they put this group together and the priest helped them. And what they did was commit themselves to a support group format that's a lot like Alcoholics Anonymous, very similar kind of structure is what they came up with. And they wrote goals for their group and made resolutions to live by those goals every single day. Again, kind of like AA, not dissimilar. And eventually more of those groups formed with the same goals, and which gave birth to Courage International that endures even to this day. It now expands across into other nations, and it's recognized by the Holy See. It's the only officially recognized Catholic apostolate on this front by the Vatican, right? Encourage is the sister apostolate to Courage. In 1987, it was created on a similar model to support family members of men and women who experience SSA because they have their own particular challenges in this situation. And it, too, has now achieved international status. Most dioceses in the United States of America have a Courage and or an Encourage chapter. So it's pretty much across the country. And it's rapidly growing now in Central and South America and also in Southeast Asia and here and there in Africa and some places in Europe. So it's around, and it's grown very, very beautifully. Here are the 5 goals of Courage that the members came up with in 1980, and the Encourage goals are similar. And this is how, when we have Courage meetings, the meeting begins. We read these goals, and this is how these men and women seek to live their lives. Goal 1, to live chaste lives in accordance with the Roman Catholic Church's teachings on homosexuality, chastity. Goal 2, to dedicate our entire lives to Christ through service to others, spiritual reading, prayer, meditation, individual spiritual direction, frequent attendance at Mass, and the frequent reception of the sacraments of reconciliation and Holy Eucharist, so prayer and dedication. Goal 3, to foster a spirit of fellowship in which we may share with one another our thoughts and experiences, and so ensure that no one will have to face the problems of homosexuality alone. Fellowship. Goal 4, to be mindful of the truth that chaste friendships are not only possible but necessary in a chaste Christian life, and to encourage one another in forming and sustaining those friendships. Support. And Goal 5, to live lives that may serve as good examples and role models to others. Good example, role model. Those are beautiful, beautiful statements of faith and behavior, and I would say personal outlook on the world that allows one to navigate what is hard about the situation. Are any of these things easy? No. Are they of the gospel? Completely. They're pitch perfect in their theology. All the groups are anonymous, and they have a priest chaplain that is assigned to them. And the groups meet on a consistent, regular schedule to offer support and also to become a spiritual family of friends. So it is, in the best sense, a safe space. Group time is sharing of personal joys, of struggles, group prayer, formation, fellowship, social gatherings, in or out of the group. And as often is said, it's a place of communion. It's a place of communion. There's no conversion therapy that takes place in these gatherings. And as they say to me, we're not psychologists, it's a spiritual group. It's a spiritual group of friendship. And it's a group where everybody already knows you got SSA, so it's on the table. No one's got to, that's the easy part because we're all there for the same reason. So it kind of lets one have one's guard down without having to hide it. It can be out in the open on the table. And all the same goals. So not only do we all have SSA, but everyone on the table agrees to these goals. So you can't come to the group unless you do. So there's no fear that it's going to become some sort of inappropriate relationship situation. So it's beautifully free that way. And it lets them talk about something besides sexuality, because by nature the groups are supposed to talk about faith also, and not always make this be the topic of one's life, because it can be kind of exhausting to have it always be the topic of one's life. So sometimes we try to talk about anything else, just because there's so much else in the world than my sexuality, frankly. Okay? It's freedom to form good friendships, to work on virtue. It's freedom to work with others who get the same struggles. It's support and encouragement to keep striving after a healthy lifestyle. That's what it is. And encourage for the parents, very, very similar, right? It's moms and dads and spouses who say, I have this situation, I have a child, and this is what they said to me, and how do I deal with it? And the person across the table goes, yeah, we know. It happened to us too. Here's how we did it. Here's how we pick up the phone. We'll talk. We'll support each other. It's not easy. So these are tremendously important places of community. The last piece I'll offer is a little piece on the Serenity Prayer. Famous on, you can get this thing on the internet, right? You'll probably know what it is. But it's very much, I think, the spirituality of the situation, of integration, of the healing that the church is talking about for authentic pastoral support. And it's prayed often at our Courage and Encourage meetings. And it summarizes what we're trying to do here, or lay out this morning. And the prayer goes like this. And as I'm reading this, just listen to all of the aspects of pastoral care that I'm trying to touch on here. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as the pathway to peace, taking as he did the sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that he'll make all things right if I surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever in the next. So some things cannot be changed. SSA is not going to be a normal thing. And if those desires are acted upon, divine revelation makes it clear to us that I'm only going to increase my interior pain, not lessen it. This is a contra of the cultural argument, right? So I'm going to accept what cannot be changed. This is a part of me, and also it's an absolute fact that if I act out on it in appropriate ways, it will make it worse. It will make my pain worse. That is the Catholic understanding grounded in the truth of revelation. And I've experienced the truth of this prayer as a courage chaplain over and over again for years now. Active gay behavior leads to more internal pain, not less. And walking the pathway of chaste integration of our desires opens up a beautiful, healthy, happier world. It gives life. It gives life. Accepting hardships as a pathway to peace, taking the world on its own terms, not as I want to reinvent it, either in myself or, frankly, in the culture. Okay? One cannot remake what is, I would say, divinely constituted reality. And that's an important lesson to learn. The group exists so that members can help each other come to terms with these nuggets of gospel wisdom. And this is the pathway to peace for those impacted by SSA. The pathway to peace is this integration of the reality that it is in appropriate ways with what's off limits and what's to be embraced, right? For more information about Courage and Encourage, I direct you to visit the Courage website, couragerc.org. There is a wealth of information on the website, essays and presentations and witness talks and a great pastoral handbook with brilliantly articulated teachings. It's a very, very important resource for anybody who either has SSA or has a loved one who has it. So I would recommend it highly. So to wrap up, conclusion, we reached the end here. Any authentic pastoral care has to be grounded in the Church's established teachings about the truth of the human person and God's plan for human love. That is a given, no matter what we're talking about, whatever the issue. And to question this is to question Revelation itself, which places us in dangerous territory. If one is going to try and question Revelation, then one is not in good territory in the Christian plan of salvation, right? And if we're going to question it, it places us out of communion with God and with His church. There are established teachings. We know what they are. And as one tries to rework them, it does more harm than it does good for the people in this population. And this I've seen firsthand. And these are principles that apply to everybody, whether they are impacted by SSA or not. You pick the issue, the response is the same. And the courage and encourage approach or apostolates are places of true communion. They are gifts to the church. They are authentic pastoral outreach. And they're places of great hope and the full reality of God's wonderful plan of salvation for the whole human family. They're a model for how to integrate the gospel into one's heart and life around a particular issue. And one could emulate that in lots of other ways in the world. So I want to end by asking for your prayers for courage and for encourage, for the chaplains who serve it across the world, for families of those impacted by this, and for the ongoing conversion of all our hearts to understand God's plan for us and for loving the world after His own beautiful design. Thank you very much for your time this morning. So this is an important question, and I'm going to disappoint you by saying there's no clean-cut answer to this, because a lot of it's very case by case, and this comes up in encourage all the time. So yes, we get these invitations, so-and-so is quote-unquote getting married, and we are supposed to go and somehow celebrate this. One's right to have one's first reaction be real discomfort with the invitation, because one recognizes it as an attempt to normalize something that is not supposed to be like it is, and one's going to question, how can I go about this in such a way that I do maintain a communication with my loved one, but not support something I know is not going to help them? This is the thing that's at stake, right? I've seen every family walk through this in different ways. Some have said, I outright refuse to go, and that's its own pathway for that family as it unfolds. Some have said, I'm going to go and sit in the back with a black veil on or something like that, which you can do that. Some have said, I'm not going to come to the ceremony, but I'll come to the reception. So it just depends, I think, on the kind of strain your family can bear in the particular moment of the time, of siblings, of where they're at, everything else. But I will say this, I think that what is consistent across the board is that anybody needs to be really uncomfortable with being happy about the situation. Okay, because it's not what we want to have happen in the church's plan and God's plan and for that person's well-being. So if one can find any way to avoid what looks like a full public endorsement of this, even if that's subtle, one should do so. That would be the blanket answer that I can give. How that looks will depend a lot upon the situation in question.
Should I allow my child with SSA to stay in my home with their significant other, and I think they're alluding to cohabitation, or do we include their partner in family events like birthdays?
Yes, the same thing. I would say, again, it depends upon the kind of tension your family can bear, but it would be a very unfortunate thing if one gave the impression that when one is at somebody's house, as in your own, you were going to treat them in the same way you would treat any other married couple, okay, or even like a dating couple. So here's some nuancing on this, right? Maybe it's the case in some people's situations that a opposite-sex couple has come over Thanksgiving and they have, for your own reasons, shared a bedroom. While that's morally problematic and sinful and wrong, there's at least a shot of remedying that situation at some point. You can bargain a smidge, I guess, with this if you want to. When it comes to SSA, it's not a parallel because there's no way that situation can ever come to its conclusion that's going to be mended. That relationship is not ever going to be the life-giving situation that God allows for. So one has to treat these things a little bit differently. They both land in the same category. One has a pathway out of it. what's called getting married. The other one does not. So there's something to kind of think about as one wrestles one's way through that, right? I think there is some room potentially to open one's home at, say, Thanksgiving or Christmas to child A, B, or C who wants to bring home his friend, his partner, whatever, and to be civil and polite and cordial and friendly, because that's what decency requires anyway. But that also is going to be, do I get little kids there? What are they going to understand? What questions are they going to ask? There's a lot of situations here where if one goes down that road, then one asks the question, well, what's the exit strategy here then, right? I have tossed out at Encourage meetings this scenario. I would say, well, what if, as you're wrestling with this, and I understand it's very, very hard, right? Because families have their own little tension boxes. We all know this, okay? What if, here's me, child, and my mom and dad are married, and my dad says to my mom, as we're getting up to Thanksgiving, hey, my other wife is coming for Thanksgiving. Would that be okay? My mother would have shot him, okay? And not because she's possessive and rude, it's just that, we understand that some things just cannot be accepted in a household that's Christian, right? So the further the culture gets off the rails on this, the greater the pressure on the Orthodox parents to draw a line in the sand and say, I can't allow this, right? So I've had some parents who have said they will not be coming over, we will not treat them like a partner, they will not be in a bedroom, and it's turned out fine, to be honest. They worked their way through that. There are others who have tried to take a little more of a middle ground and say, well, they know what I think about this, they know I'm not happy, we've talked about it, and there are some boundaries around the situation. The younger siblings are older, they're out of the house. So they've wiggled their way forward on this because it's what's maintained some kind of peace. I get it. But at the end of the day, one asks the question, but where is it going to go? So I think one has to pick one's way through it carefully and knowing where one's trying to go. And that's the best that I can offer in that situation.
So the secular model of SSA seems to ignore the physiological problem of same-sex genital activity. And if a person in a long-standing SSA relationship is sexually active and monogamous, how do you counsel them regarding their sexual activity?
So the first question about the secular model ignoring the bodily realities of genitalia, this is accurate. We live in a culture and a world that has, unfortunately, abandoned any kind of natural law, I would say teleological approach to personal health. What does that mean? That things in our bodies have a purpose and a natural end. This is labeled as medieval in our world in like some sort of a bad way, but the fact is it's quite accurate. So if I know my body systems are four, I know what's healthy and unhealthy. And if I go to the doctor because something is amiss in me, it's because I expect the doctor to understand how to get me back onto the system's proper natural end. My digestive system is for digestion, and so as I often famously say, if I eat roofing nails, I'm going to have a problem with it. And a good physician understands because of its end that you can't eat those kinds of objects and be successful. We have set that idea to the side when it comes to sexuality. We've flipped it. We have decided that the body itself doesn't point to a greater end when it comes to reproduction. And because of that, we have decided that in my mind, I can invent any ethics that I want to, no matter how distorted it makes the sexual practices that I'm engaging in, be that contraception or same-sex activity. So, yes, to answer the question, the secular model for sure ignores, I would say, self-evident bodily realities. Okay, and if I've worked with some SSA people who have left the SSA lifestyle, have gotten married to an opposite-sex partner, and they have talked very interestingly about what they, how do I put this, realized was so different about sex with an opposite sex than the same. And it sort of opened their eyes to the reality of what they were doing before didn't make any sense. They just didn't see it at the time. We are often blinded by our desires sometimes, right? So we don't handle this well as a culture. To the other question, how do I counsel people who are in these committed relationships? I think that's also a little on the case-by-case side. I would say that if anybody is engaged in a kind of sexual activity with someone that you're living with, the real beginning is to stop that. That needs to come to an end because it's an ongoing distortion of the situation. It's not emotionally good. It's morally sinful and problematic. And one's heart and grace is not going to be open to God's pathways if one's engaging in something that is contrary to God's plan. Now, if they can stop that, is there some room for a kind of partnership that's going to be chaste and good? I'd say right now in Catholic circles, this is something of an open question. There's a school that lands on absolutely not, because even the emotional same-sex connection is its own problem. I would say I land a little bit more in the category of, well, it depends. There are some people who are quite capable, because I've seen them do this, of picking their way through the particularities of this to come out on the other side in a pretty good, healthy friendship that is chaste and good and helps them. Others cannot handle that. And the best thing for them is, frankly, to move out. And it's going to depend upon where you're at, how deep the desire, what's the situation. And I often say you kind of walk your way through that knowing where you have to go, which is a chaste end. And the way to get there is going to walk along these ways. So I think to a degree it depends upon the situation on the second part of it. But for sure, though, any kind of active sexual activity would be out of the question for really helping somebody move on in a good way in the situation.
So on a similar note, is there a connection between non-unitive contraceptive sexual activity among an opposite-sex couple and same-sex sexual activity?
So what's the connection between contraceptive sex, between man and woman, and same-sex? Yeah, they are frankly both disordered activities, right? If one understands that the ordering of our reproductive systems is to reproduction, and one intentionally engages in a way that is intentionally contravening the plan for it, it too will have its own corrosive impact on the person and on the relationship. And it's also, this is a much longer topic, but I've talked on this recently. It's in a society that is very individual-centered like we are in the West, we don't think about ourselves as part of a larger human family first and persons second. We kind of reverse it. It's me, the person, and all the persons together make up the society. The ancient worldview would flip it. We'd say, I'm a community first, and I'm in it secondarily. In the older model, one would never dream of cutting off one's offspring because one knows one's cutting off the community's future. It's not going to continue. And so in the current mindset, we think, well, I'm the most important thing, the community's second, and so if I do this, what's the harm? Multiply that by a bunch of millions of people, and you suddenly have a demographic collapse that leaves you now with no one to work at Panera and Quick Trip and Walmart. So, it too is unnatural if one thinks about it communally. If you're SSA, same thing. It is an unnatural thing for two people of the same sex to engage in sexual contact. It is not of the way our bodies are constructed. But here's the catch. One of those things has a remedy. One can stop using contraception. One can learn NFP. One could, I suppose, reverse surgeries if one wants to, or at least learn to kind of work through a kind of NFP cycle, even on a sterilized body, as a way to remedy that somehow. There's no remedying the SSA situation if it's going to be sexually active. You can work into a chaste friendship model, because I've seen it, it's possible, it's work, but anything actively sexual, there's no fixing that. So they're similar. One is perhaps a smidge more severe than the other because of how one has to, I think, make a break with it in a pretty radical way. But yeah.
How do we reach adolescents who suspect they are gay before or shortly after they can act on it? And are there any guidelines for Catholic high schools to help support those with SSA?
This is hard. So I don't think that many of us in the current world who are younger, I'm still young, I guess I'm going to be 44 in a week. Is that young? Would you call that young, I guess? Don't really appreciate the extent to which in prior decades the largely Christian culture carried us forward. The culture raised us Christians for us. I'll give you like mass attendance, we're always harping on that, right? Which is an important thing to harp on. The thing of it is, in the 50s, a good person went to church in this country. Didn't matter what denomination it was, you just went, and it was a violation of a social norm not to go. So whether they really believed it or not is another question, but they went because there was social pressure to go. And the culture made you Christian because the culture lumbered on that way, whether you believed it or not. Monsignor Shea will talk about this in his book that Lydia talked about before the talk. Sexuality is something of the same thing. Unfortunately, right now, the culture is so off the page on this topic as opposed to the church's outlook, that it becomes very, very difficult to shelter your child from the cultural model. It's just pervasive. And it takes an incredibly strong person and family to stand up to all of it. It's highly seductive, right? So the culture now, as opposed to years and years ago, is working against the grain on this particular point. But you can't raise your kids in a bubble. It's just not possible, nor is it good. So one has to, I guess, work one's way along as best one can in explaining in a household at age-appropriate points, here's what marriage is, here's what sexuality is, and you might see something else lived out around you on billboards or media, but as Christians, we don't do that. We don't do that as Christians, right? And then hopefully also one works as well as one can as a parent on building a rapport so that one day if an adolescent does experience this, they will at least feel like mom and dad can listen if they experience something that goes against the norm that the household has reinforced. But it's a very hard balance to strike in a culture that is so anti what we're trying to do here this morning. So I have no magic answer, unfortunately, other than some careful work across the years. In terms of use of Catholic school...
Catholic high schools.
Catholic high school, oh yeah. Yeah, a Catholic high school is a Catholic institution. That means it's supposed to support what the church teaches. So if faculty and parents don't do that, it makes it very hard in a building to reinforce the appropriate way to handle this particular topic. There has been some talk once upon a time of trying to do it like a courage model in high schools. And unfortunately, due to the nature of courage, it doesn't really lend itself to that age group in the same way. It would be a highly nuanced situation. Well, I suppose one could, but it had to be very carefully done. I think it's up to high school moral theology and theology instructors and high school chaplains to be able to have an open door policy on come and talk to me about anything. I'm not going to yell at you. But when you come and talk to me, you can expect that I'm going to try and tell you what the best thing for you is. And we take our cue from that, from the gospel. That's going to be how we're going to do it, right? And maybe not everybody in the building will buy what I'm selling, but at least my door is open to talk about it if I'm the priest, chaplain, or the faculty member who wants to support this. And I think as an archdiocese, we continue to work hard on trying to keep our schools in an appropriate Catholic direction. It's a battle. It's hard to find people who understand these things to come and work on our buildings and send their kids to us, but we try. And this is the fight that's ahead of us on every front, not just in the schools around this issue.
How do you engage a child who has rejected their parents and the church because of their ideology on SSA?
How to engage a child who has rejected parents and church? I would say that, unfortunately, as I have watched this unfold over the years, parents will contact me in a very emotionally upset state, understandably, because they were told the day before that daughter or son has SSA, and it's this thing in the household now. And the next question is, can you talk to them? And I say, well, do they want to talk to me? Because if they don't, it's not going to be a helpful conversation. So I get into that one when they actually have some openness to it. And some of them have. Many of them are not interested because they've already went through the internal process long before they open their mouths about how they felt about this and about God. And they've already, unfortunately, kind of walked out the door. In that state, I'm not a magician, and I cannot fix that. That being said, what we talk a lot about in the church is the power of prayer, about the power of grace, and about God's boundless ability as a patient teacher who walks with all of us, myself included, through the dumbest decisions of our lives, never giving up on us at all. And we tell the parents, just because right now they don't want to talk to you about it, doesn't mean that will always be the case. And it does mean you're going to fix things by bending the line on this. It's a seductive way out, but it's not entirely helpful. We know this from moral theology. So be patient. Talk about something else, frankly, for a while. How about the Packers? That's a great topic, right? But pick the other subject, Don't make this the thing. And let them learn that they can still be in your house and as a child, and they can have in their life, even if you disagree on the point. Okay? People disagree on things all the time, and they're still families, right? This is not impossible. And I would say most deeply, I think most people in the Courage apostolate, as you listen to them tell their stories, they're very honest about this. They landed there the hard way. They almost all tried the active lifestyle and found it wanting. And when they figured it out the hard way, like we all, me too, have to learn, then they came to another understanding about it. And one cannot make anyone go through that the hard way. They just have to do it on their own. Parents, you understand how this works, right? So there's a degree of having to sit back and say, like the dad in the prodigal son story, okay, you want to leave the house? Fine. You want to go spend money on prostitutes? Fine. I'll be here when you get back, and my house will be open to you. And sometimes that's how one has to do it, praying for them all along the way. So.
You mentioned that the pain associated with SSA is particularly related to feelings of isolation, a poverty which we see across the board with people today. What steps do we take as lay Catholics to meet this poverty in our communities more proactively?
Yes, that's the question. I think, there's a lot of ways to answer that question. I couldn't give you them all this morning, but I guess I'll just say this, and I've said this before from the pulpit. I think that we do a disservice as a church in recent times of not talking enough about the Christian meaning of human suffering and about, I'd say, lowering expectations for ourselves and others and culture. We live in our Western type A world in a place where so much is so molded and perfect that we just can't handle it when it doesn't go where it's supposed to go. And I think a Christian culture has a much healthier, realistic sense of expectations, of perfection, of day-to-day sufferings, of offering it up, of the fact that most of the world doesn't have, get this, a Walmart to walk into with aisles and aisles of laundry detergent. I mean, seriously? What do we need this for, right? So I think part of our problem is we have lost the idea that we can go without and it's going to be okay, and that my notions of self-image and self-everything else are overweighted from a culture that has lost the cross. So I think as we preach the cross, again, there's no magic fix. That's what the gospel says it over and over again. But I think part of it is that the community has to understand that the hardships of life have a place. I do not think the answer, if I may say it, is for a parish or community to openly advocate policies or teachings that are against our church's teachings in attempt to be more quote-unquote welcoming. That's not authentic pastoral care, and that would be what I was trying to say in the talk. So don't do that. That's not actually going to help anything. It's going to sow confusion, scandal, discord, and frustration and violate God's plan. However, a community can be, as a parish, we suffer together, we have joys together, we pray together, we come to Mass together, and we figure it out as we go along. It's a household, right? And there's no recipe for that, but one must just live it out. That's my only, I guess, suggestion.
This is a question I think a lot of us can relate to. Many of my gay coworkers are starting to raise kids now and love to discuss that. How do I affirm the goodness of family while not condoning those gay relationships?
That's very hard. I think, I would be as... kids are a gift no matter who has them and where they are. We understand that they come from God and they are beautiful, even if they came out through means that we would call morally illicit. That's what artificial, insemination is and everything else, in vitro, morally illicit, etc. Nonetheless, I guess you could say to that situation, you know what, I'm happy for your child. It's great that they're doing X, Y, and Z, and I would just kind of leave it at that. I wouldn't get any more or less excited about it. Personally, as I encounter that, which isn't often because you might imagine, given my outfit, they don't often share things like that with me, but let's say that I do, I share the joy, but in my heart, I kind of quietly weep for the fact that this child is in a situation that's very abnormal for them and poses real challenges for their ongoing development as a child of God, right? Does that mean that they're automatically condemned? No, I am not saying that, because God can do lots of things with all kinds of messes, okay? So I guess I listen, but inside with a kind of prayerful, God, Lord, maybe this person can just understand at some point why this is just not the best situation. And maybe they can have their heart open to some kind of a change, right? And I leave it at that. I don't often find that arguing is going to help. Usually it doesn't at that point. So.
And what suggestions do you have for Catholic therapists licensed by secular organizations to support and love clients with SSA?
Quit. Sorry. This is where I give the CMA so much credit. To Dr. Smith's point, I think I went to 4 national conferences over the years, Atlanta, Springfield, Phoenix, St. Paul. And I was in awe of the room because they were getting into an industry that is increasingly hostile to good medical ethics from a Christian perspective, The Hippocratic Oath, what does it even mean today, right? So anybody right now engaged in medical helping at all, and from a Catholic perspective, is facing challenges from insurance providers, from lawyers, from bosses, from mandates. The only advice that I can give is persevere as best you possibly can, because the fact is we do need you. I have no one to send people to when they want to go talk to a counselor. It's very, very hard because so many people don't understand this, and they're pressured by their own particular employers or whatever to walk some line. So I guess what you do is you don't need to bring up the church word or the God word, but you can still counsel people as best you can, walk them along slowly on what's healthy behavior. We can still use the H word, I guess, healthy, right? And a natural law perspective supports that if you're a Christian or not. It was brought up a bit ago. When one thinks about how a body is constructed, certain behaviors make more sense than others. And if one kind of senses that in one's gut, one shouldn't push that away as some old-fashioned thinking. That's the truth, trying to break through. So I guess, hang in there. We do need you. And if you want to be as Catholic as possible about the topic, you can without mentioning church, because, frankly, it's a natural law argument that supports all of our teachings. One doesn't need the Bible at all. One just needs biology, and you will have that in spades. So welcome along as best you possibly can, because we do want you to persevere. It's important that you do.
Okay, and this is our last question. It's 2-part. What are your thoughts on the Eden Invitation Apostolate, and what resources or books do you recommend for those with SSA or their loved ones?
Okay, yeah, thank you. Eden Invitation began here in Milwaukee a little while ago, and I knew the founders once upon a time. They used to work with me on different things, and so here's how I think about it at the moment, because they've evolved a little bit since they first talked to me, and they've since relocated their home base to another city, up to St. Paul. I find them helpful. Well, first of all, they're in a good official relationship with Courage International. Our director and our board knows about them. We talk often, so we work together on things. So I think that we have a good relationship with them. We differ a smidge in our approach, and it would go kind of like this. I would say if one's going to be in Courage, and in Courage too, it's only going to make sense if one has decided internally that these goals are going to be my goals. Like, I'm going to do this, and the support group structure is constructed to support that lifestyle and model. Eden Invitation, I would say, is something like a toe in the water approach to that viewpoint. I think if they see themselves as a middle ground. So they want to get people to where the Courage situation is, but they recognize, rightly so, that right now in our world, many people are so skittish about church stuff and God stuff that they might want to first sort of try out this Christian community thing without a hardcore commitment about certain kinds of things, like sign on the line, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. So Eden offers a front porch, let's say, where they have book clubs, they have social gatherings and whatnot, and with the hope that as people kind of join in, they realize, there can be this is like a community, and I have support. I won't be always alone. And so I send people to them who I know have already become very committed in the Courage principles, who also are seeking a wider community of support and friendship. And it's a social support for them. So I think they're a good thing in that way. I would say that their ongoing challenge is going to be, as they go along, to navigate the fact that at a certain point, one does have to make a decision. And this is the thing they're always working their way through. If we're going to kind of be the middle between the culture and the church, which has a place, at a certain point, one does have to part company. and one must say that with a kind of conviction. And I think they're still praying their way through how that looks for their very good and well-intentioned mission in a culture that's increasingly hostile. So I think they're a help. I would say that. Other books and resources. Anything on the Courage website is excellent. Anything written by Father John Harvey, who was our founder, excellent. But for sure, I would start with the website. It's all there, especially the Courage. We just rewrote a couple of years ago the handbook for Courage and Encourage chaplains. And that we wrote it in such a way that while it says handbook for chaplains, it's really written for everybody. So you can skip over the parts about how to run a meeting, but everything else in there is very good pastoral theology and church articulation of these situations, of family dynamics. At the very end of it, there is 3 or 4 pages on gender discordance, which was a very carefully constructed piece of the document, which is, I think, the guidepost for how we deal with gender things now in the organization, too. I would start there, to be honest, and branch out from the website.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Father, for bringing light on this ministry and sharing with us all how we can help our fellow Catholics who have same-sex attraction. We are grateful for your continued ministry.
Thank you.